The night was cold, and the city lights looked beautiful from far away. Cars moved fast, people walked with purpose, and everyone seemed busy with their own lives. But on a quiet corner near a tall glass building, a man sat alone on the sidewalk. Most people did not notice him. Some avoided looking at him. To them, he was just another homeless man. His name was Marcus. Marcus sat with an old coat wrapped around him, watching the world pass by. He did not beg. He did not shout. He only watched. His eyes were calm, but they carried stories no one cared to hear. People thought he had nothing. No home, no money, no future. But they did not know who he once was or what he understood. That night, something unusual happened. A long black luxury car suddenly stopped near the sidewalk. The engine stayed on. The back window was slightly open. Inside the car sat a man who looked powerful, but at that moment, he looked broken. His name was Richard Hale, one of the richest businessmen in the city. A billionaire known for control, confidence, and success. But tonight, his voice was shaking. "I don't care what it costs," Richard said loudly into his phone. "We are losing everything. The investors are pulling out. The board is turning against me. I don't know how to fix this." Marcus heard every word. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes focused on the car. He listened carefully, not with curiosity, but with understanding. The kind of understanding that comes from losing everything before. Inside the car, Richard ended the call angrily and threw his phone on the seat. For a moment, he covered his face with his hands. The powerful billionaire looked completely helpless. Marcus stood up slowly and walked closer. The driver looked uncomfortable, ready to tell him to move away. But before the driver could speak, Marcus said something calm and simple. "I can fix this." The driver frowned. Richard looked up, surprised. For a second, there was silence. Then Richard let out a short laugh. "You," he said, "you can fix $1 billion problem?" Marcus did not react to the laughter. He did not look offended. He only looked calm. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "because your problem is not money." Richard stopped smiling. Something about the man's voice felt different. It was not desperate. It was not begging. It sounded certain. The billionaire studied him carefully now. Marcus looked tired, his clothes old and worn. But his eyes did not look lost. They looked sharp, observing, thinking. "Then what is my problem?" Richard asked, half curious, half annoyed. Marcus paused for a moment before answering. "Trust," he said. "You lost it, and now everything else is falling." The words hit harder than Richard expected. No one on his team had said that. Everyone talked about numbers, markets, and strategies. But this stranger spoke as if he already understood the whole situation. The street became quiet again. Cars passed, people walked by, but something had changed in that moment. Richard leaned back in his seat, thinking. It sounded crazy. Listening to a homeless man about business problems made no sense. But nothing else was working either. Every expert he hired had failed. Desperation makes people consider impossible things. "All right," Richard finally said. "Let's say I listen to you. Why should I trust you?" Marcus gave a small, tired smile. "Because," he said softly, "I already lost everything once." Richard felt a strange feeling he could not explain. For the first time that night, he was not angry. He was curious. Who was this man? And how could someone with nothing speak like he understood everything? The driver looked confused as Richard opened the car door. "Get in," the billionaire said. Marcus hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. Neither of them knew that this moment, a billionaire and a homeless man meeting on a cold street, was about to change both of their lives forever. The car moved slowly through the city streets while silence filled the space inside. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, looking out of the window. Bright lights passed by his face, but his expression did not change. Richard Hale watched him carefully, still unsure if he had made a smart decision or a desperate mistake. It felt strange. A billionaire asking advice from a homeless man. Richard finally broke the silence. "You said my problem is trust. Explain that." Marcus did not answer immediately. He took a deep breath, as if choosing his words carefully. When people stop believing in a leader, Marcus said calmly, they stop believing in everything connected to him. Investors leave. Employees lose hope. and fear spreads faster than truth. Richard frowned. That sounded too accurate. How do you know this? He asked. Marcus looked down at his hands. They were rough and worn now, very different from what they used to be. For a moment, he seemed far away, lost in memory. Because it happened to me, he said quietly. Years ago, Marcus was not on the streets. He was an engineer. Not famous, not rich, but respected. He worked for a growing technology company. He solved problems others could not see. His ideas saved projects that were close to failure. People trusted him, but success changed things around him. New management came in. Decisions became about money instead of people. Marcus warned them about risks in a major project. He said the system was unstable. He said it could fail. No one listened. When the project collapsed, the company needed someone to blame. Marcus became the easiest target. His warnings were ignored, and his name was quietly pushed out of the industry. Job offers stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. Slowly, everything fell apart. One bad year became many. An accident followed. Medical bills grew. Savings disappeared. And one day, Marcus found himself with nowhere left to go. Richard listened without interrupting. For the first time, he saw the man differently. Not as a homeless stranger, but as someone who once stood where he stood now. Responsible, pressured, and alone. So you gave up? Richard asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. No, he said. I learned. He explained how living on the streets changed his perspective. When you lose everything, you start seeing people clearly. You notice fear. You notice lies. You notice when someone pretends to be strong, but is actually scared. You are not losing your company because of numbers, Marcus said. You're losing it because people don't believe you anymore. Richard leaned back, thinking. His board doubted him. Investors questioned his decisions. Even employees looked uncertain during meetings. Marcus was describing exactly what was happening. But how do I fix that? Richard asked quietly. Marcus looked at him directly for the first time. You stop pretending everything is fine. Richard's expression hardened. You want me to admit weakness? That will destroy confidence. Marcus shook his head again. No, he said calmly. Hiding the truth destroys confidence. Honesty rebuilds it. The words stayed in the air. Simple, but dangerous. Outside, the car stopped in front of Richard's tall office building. Glass walls reflected the city lights, a symbol of power and success. But tonight, it felt fragile. Richard hesitated before opening the door. Why help me? He asked. You don't even know me. Marcus gave a small smile. Because someone should have helped me when I tried to tell the truth. Richard stepped out of the car slowly. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt clear but also afraid. Marcus's idea was risky. Very risky. Inside the building, executives were waiting, expecting another late-night crisis meeting. None of them knew that the next decision would come from a man they would never accept. As Marcus followed Richard inside, employees stared in confusion. Security looked uncertain. Whispers began immediately. Who was this man? And why was the billionaire listening to him? Marcus looked around calmly. He had been in buildings like this before. He knew how quickly power could disappear. And deep down, he knew something else. The hardest part had not even started yet. The next morning, the entire building felt tense. Employees spoke in low voices. News channels were already talking about Richard Hale's company. Words like crisis, failure, and collapse appeared on every screen. Investors were nervous, and the board members wanted answers. Inside a large meeting room, executives sat around a long table. Expensive suits, serious faces, and restless hands filled the room. When Richard walked in, everyone turned toward him. But their attention quickly shifted to the man walking behind him. Marcus. His clothes were simple. His shoes were worn. He looked out of place among glass walls and polished floors. Some executives exchanged confused looks. Others looked annoyed. One board member leaned forward. Richard, who is this? Richard paused for a moment before answering. Even he knew how strange this looked. He's helping, Richard said simply. The room fell silent. A few people almost laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Richard's face was serious. Marcus did not sit down. He stood quietly near the wall, observing everyone. He watched their expressions, their body language, the way they avoided eye contact with Richard. He could feel the fear in the room. After the meeting started, numbers filled the screen. Losses, falling stock prices, canceled deals. Every solution sounded the same. Cut costs, hide weaknesses, protect image. Marcus finally spoke. That won't work. The room froze. One executive frowned. Excuse me? Marcus stepped forward calmly. People already know something is wrong. Pretending everything is fine will only make it worse. A board member shook his head angrily. And what would you suggest? Marcus looked at Richard before answering. Tell the truth. The reaction was immediate. Voices rose. Some called the idea reckless. Others said it would destroy investor confidence completely. Public honesty during a crisis sounded like business suicide. Richard stayed quiet, thinking. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. Right now, people think you're hiding something. Fear grows when there are no answers. If you speak honestly first, you control the story. The room argued for nearly an hour. But deep down, Richard knew Marcus was right. Every strategy so far had failed. Finally, Richard made a decision that shocked everyone. We're holding a press conference today, he said, and we're telling the truth. The room exploded with objections. Board members warned him. Advisors tried to stop him. But Richard did not change his mind. By afternoon, cameras filled the company lobby. Reporters waited, expecting another corporate speech full of excuses. Richard stepped onto the stage. Lights flashed. Questions were shouted. For a moment, he looked nervous. Then he remembered Marcus's words. He took a deep breath. Our company made mistakes, Richard said, and I take responsibility for them. The room went silent. No excuses. No blaming others. Just honesty. He explained the problems clearly. He admitted poor decisions. He promised change, not perfection. It was risky, uncomfortable, real. Within minutes, social media exploded. Some people criticized him, but many were surprised. Employees watching the broadcast felt something different, relief. For the first time, someone at the top sounded human. Back upstairs, executives watched in shock. But not everyone was happy. Several board members were furious. They blamed Marcus immediately. To them, this homeless outsider had pushed their CEO into public weakness. This is madness, one of them said. He's destroying the company. That evening, security approached Marcus in the lobby. I'm sorry, the guard said politely. You're not allowed in the building anymore. Marcus nodded calmly, as if he expected this. He picked up his old coat and walked outside without arguing. Across the street, Richard stood by the window of his office, watching Marcus leave. Doubt filled his mind again. Had he made the biggest mistake of his career? Down on the sidewalk, Marcus stopped for a moment and looked back at the building. He knew what everyone else did not understand yet. The first step always looks like failure before it becomes change. And the real test was about to begin. The next few days felt like a storm that would not end. News channels replayed Richard Hale's press conference again and again. Some reporters praised his honesty, but many called it a sign of weakness. Headlines questioned his leadership. Analysts predicted the company's collapse. Social media was full of opinions, and not all of them were kind. Inside the company, fear spread quickly. Employees whispered in hallways. Some started updating their resumes. Others avoided meetings, unsure of what would happen next. The board members were angry. They believed Richard had embarrassed the company in public. And in their eyes, one person was responsible. Marcus. Even though he was no longer inside the building, his influence remained. Executives blamed him for everything going wrong. The stock price dropped again. Investors called nonstop. Some demanded immediate changes. Others threatened to leave completely. Every phone call added more pressure on Richard's shoulders. Late at night, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the city below. The same city that once admired him now seemed ready to watch him fail. For the first time in years, he felt unsure of himself. Maybe the board was right. Maybe trusting Marcus was a mistake. He replayed their conversation in his mind. Tell the truth. It sounded simple then, but now everything looked worse, not better. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to the streets. The cold air felt familiar again. Nothing around him had changed. The noise of traffic, the distant sirens, the people walking past without noticing him. It was the same life he had known for years. But Marcus did not look worried. He sat quietly near a small coffee shop, watching people move through their routines. A young worker rushed by, talking about the company crisis on his phone. Marcus listened silently. He knew this part would happen. Change always creates chaos first. Later that evening, Richard found himself standing outside the same street corner where they first met. He did not know why he came back. Maybe he wanted answers. Maybe he wanted reassurance. He saw Marcus sitting there, calm as always. "You said this would work," Richard said, frustration clear in his voice. "Everything is getting worse." Marcus looked up slowly. He did not seem surprised to see him. "Is it worse?" Marcus asked. "Or is it finally honest?" Richard frowned. He was too tired for riddles. "My company is falling apart," he said. "People are losing confidence." Marcus nodded gently. "Because they are seeing the truth for the first time. And truth is uncomfortable." Richard shook his head. "I don't have time for this. I need results." Marcus studied him carefully before speaking again. "When a building is damaged," he said, "you don't paint over the cracks. You break the weak parts and rebuild them stronger." Richard stayed silent. The words made sense, but fear made it hard to believe. "What if everything breaks?" Richard asked quietly. Marcus gave a small smile. "Then you finally know what was real." The city noise filled the silence between them. Richard realized something uncomfortable. Marcus was not afraid of losing everything, because he already had. That gave him a kind of freedom Richard had never known. Back at the company, tension reached its peak. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Some members were already discussing replacing Richard as CEO. They wanted control back. They wanted safety, not risk. Richard returned to his office feeling trapped. One choice remained. He could stop now, apologize publicly, and return to the old way of doing things. Or he could continue trusting a man the world refused to believe in. He looked out at the city lights again, remembering Marcus's calm voice. Sometimes things must break before they heal. For the first time, Richard understood what that really meant. And deep down, he realized something frightening. The real crisis had not been the company. The real crisis was whether he had the courage to change before everything truly collapsed. The pressure inside the company had reached its limit. The board meeting room was filled with tension. Voices were louder than usual. Some members demanded immediate action. Others openly questioned Richard's leadership. Charts and reports covered the screens, showing losses, falling numbers, and uncertain forecasts. To them, the solution was simple. Remove risk. Remove uncertainty. Remove Richard. Richard sat quietly at the end of the table, listening. Just weeks ago, these same people had supported every decision he made. Now their confidence was gone. Marcus's words echoed in his mind again. When trust disappears, everything else follows. The meeting ended without agreement, but the message was clear. Richard's position was no longer safe. That night, unable to sleep, Richard searched for answers. He opened old company reports, industry records, and past project failures. He did not know exactly what he was looking for, only that something felt unfinished. Then he found a name, Marcus Reed. Years ago, Marcus had worked in the same industry. Richard discovered old technical papers and internal reports written by him. The ideas were simple but powerful. One document caught Richard's attention. It described a system weakness almost identical to the problem now destroying his company. Marcus had predicted this kind of collapse years earlier. Richard sat back in shock. Marcus had not guessed the problem. He understood it because he had seen it before. The next morning, Richard returned to the street where Marcus usually sat. Marcus was there, drinking coffee slowly, as if nothing in the world was urgent. "You knew," Richard said as he approached. "You knew this could happen." Marcus looked up calmly. "Yes. Why didn't anyone listen to you back then?" Richard asked. Marcus smiled slightly, but there was sadness in it. Because the truth was expensive. Richard did not understand at first. Marcus explained that fixing the system years ago would have required slowing growth and admitting mistakes early. Companies did not like that. Leaders feared losing confidence, so they ignored warnings until failure became unavoidable. "It's easier to blame someone later," Marcus said quietly. Richard felt the weight of those words. He realized he had almost made the same mistake, focusing on appearance instead of reality. But what do we do now? Richard asked. We already lost too much. Marcus stood up slowly. His expression became serious for the first time. Now, he said, you do the hardest thing. Marcus explained a final plan. It was risky, very risky. The company would openly admit deeper problems, restructure publicly, and give employees and customers a voice in rebuilding the system. Short-term losses would increase. The media would attack again. But long-term trust could return stronger than before. Richard hesitated. If this fails, everything is over. Marcus nodded. Yes. The honesty of the answer made the moment heavier. Then why take the risk? Richard asked. Marcus looked at the busy street around them. People walked past, unaware of the decision being made. Because right now, Marcus said, you are already losing. This is the only path that gives you a chance to win honestly. Richard realized something important then. Marcus was not trying to save the company for money or recognition. He was trying to prevent the same mistake from destroying someone else's life. For the first time, Richard fully trusted him. Later that day, Richard called an emergency announcement. Executives were shocked. The board strongly opposed the idea. Some even threatened legal action. But Richard had made his decision. The plan would move forward. As news of the announcement spread, reactions were immediate. Some called it brave. Others called it suicidal. The market responded with fear. And once again, everything looked like it was falling apart. That evening, Marcus stood alone across the street from the company building, watching the lights inside. He knew what was coming next. This was the moment where most people lost courage. Because the biggest change always comes right before the turning point. And soon, everyone would discover whether truth could really rebuild what fear had broken. The announcement changed everything. The company released a full public statement. They admitted deeper problems inside the system. They explained past mistakes clearly. They promised real changes instead of quick fixes. For a short time, the reaction was exactly what everyone feared. The stock price dropped again. News channels called it a desperate move. Some experts said the company would not survive another month. Social media was filled with doubt. Many people believed this was the final step before complete failure. Inside the company, emotions were mixed. Some employees felt scared. Others felt something new, hope. For the first time, leadership was not hiding behind perfect words. They were speaking honestly. Richard walked through the office halls and noticed something different. People were still worried, but they were talking openly now. Teams discussed solutions instead of blaming each other. Small changes began to appear. Meanwhile, the board remained divided. A few members still wanted Richard removed immediately. They believed the damage was already done. But replacing him during the crisis also carried risk. So they waited. Days passed slowly. At first, nothing improved. Numbers remained weak. Investors stayed cautious. Even Richard started to feel the pressure again. Late at night, doubt returned to his mind. What if Marcus was wrong? On the streets, Marcus watched everything from a distance. He did not visit the company anymore. He knew this stage required patience. Trust could not return in one day. People needed time to see consistency. One morning, something unexpected happened. A group of employees posted an open message online supporting the company's new direction. They spoke about honesty, responsibility, and the chance to rebuild something better. The message spread quickly. Customers began responding positively. Some said they respected the company more now than before. The tone slowly started to change. A small investor returned first, then another. Not because the company looked perfect, but because it finally looked real. Richard noticed the shift during a meeting. Conversations were calmer. Panic was slowly disappearing. For the first time in weeks, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Confidence. The turning point had begun. But Marcus was not there to see it. Richard realized he had not seen Marcus for several days. The street corner where they first met was empty. The coffee shop owner said he had not come by recently either. Marcus had disappeared quietly. Richard felt uneasy. The man who helped rebuild everything was gone before the result was clear. No interviews. No credit. No recognition. Just gone. Weeks later, The company's numbers finally stabilized. Losses slowed. Partnerships returned. Media headlines changed from collapse to unexpected recovery. The same people who once criticized Richard now called his decision brave. During a company gathering, employees applauded him. But while everyone celebrated, Richard felt something unfinished. He knew the truth. This was not only his victory. That night, Richard stood by his office window again, looking at the city lights. The same view that once felt heavy now felt calm. He thought about Marcus, a man the world ignored, a man who asked for nothing, yet changed everything. Why leave now? Richard understood slowly. Marcus never wanted power. He only wanted the lesson to survive. Down on the street, life continued as usual. People rushed home. Cars passed by. No one noticed how close everything had come to breaking completely. And somewhere in the city, Marcus walked quietly, just another face in the crowd again. The company had reached its turning point. But the final chapter, the reason Marcus helped in the first place, was still waiting to be revealed. Months passed, and the company slowly became strong again. The crisis that once threatened to destroy everything now felt like a distant memory. The system had changed. Employees worked with more trust. Customers returned. Investors spoke about the company as an example of honest leadership instead of failure. Richard Hale's name appeared in business magazines again. This time, not as a powerful billionaire, but as a leader who admitted mistakes and rebuilt from them. But inside, Richard knew the full story was not being told. Every success reminded him of one person who was missing. Marcus, the man who saw the truth when everyone else ignored it. The man who asked for nothing in return. Richard tried to find him. He asked security guards, cafe owners, and shelter workers. Weeks passed without answers. The city was too big, and people like Marcus were easy to lose in it. One evening, while visiting a small community shelter for a charity event, Richard saw a familiar figure sitting quietly at a corner table. Marcus. He looked the same as before. Calm. Simple. Unnoticed by most people around him. Richard walked toward him slowly. You disappeared, Richard said. Marcus looked up and smiled slightly. You didn't need me anymore. Richard sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of people talking and dishes moving filled the space between them. The company survived, Richard said. Because of you. Marcus shook his head gently. No, he replied. Because you chose to change. Richard realized that was true. Marcus gave direction, but the decision had always been his. Still, something bothered him. Why didn't you come back? Richard asked. You could have had a job, a home, anything you wanted. Marcus looked around the shelter before answering. When you lose everything, he said softly, you learn what really matters. I didn't help you for money. He paused, then continued. I helped because someone once refused to listen to me. And it destroyed more than just a company. I didn't want that to happen again. Richard felt the weight of those words. For the first time, he understood Marcus completely. Helping others was Marcus's way of healing his own past. Richard placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a job offer, a partnership, and enough money to change Marcus's life forever. You deserve this, Richard said. Marcus looked at the envelope, but did not open it immediately. He smiled, not with excitement, but with peace. For the first time, Marcus said, I get to choose. He explained that he would accept help, but not the way Richard expected. He wanted to work quietly, helping rebuild systems that ignored people like him before. Not for fame, not for headlines, just for purpose. Richard nodded. He respected that. As they stood to leave, Richard looked at Marcus one last time and said, You fix my company. Marcus smiled again. No, he said gently. You fix yourself. Outside, the night air felt calm. The same city lights shone above them, but everything felt different now. A billionaire and a former homeless man walked in opposite directions, both changed by a single moment of honesty. The story spread later as a lesson, not about money or success, but about something simpler. Sometimes the person the world ignores sees the truth the clearest. And sometimes the real change begins when someone finally stops pretending to be strong and chooses to be honest instead. The end was quiet, but the message stayed powerful. Because every person has value, even the ones no one stops to see.